Snake is a Winnebago tribal member, and she tells the history and the culture of the Winnebago tribe through oral storytelling. And I want you to know today you are in for a treat. The first time I heard her speak, everybody in the room had tears in their eyes. She speaks from her heart. We truly appreciate that. You will have a sense of the people and the culture and what's going on from the way she speaks. Not only that, she's a businesswoman. She's what is it? Like a superwoman. She does a lot of things in the community, community economic impact, and you were real estate, treasurer of the tribe, human resources director, gaming commission. I mean, how do you do it all?
Varsity cheerleading coach.
Yes. It is my great honor to introduce her, and you are in for a treat.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Like she said, my name is Sarah Snake. I'm a member of the Snake Clan. I noticed you guys had the clan things posted out here, but I'm a member of the Snake Clan. And my Indian name is Hohamchikarenga, means lightning woman. And I've lived on the Winnebago Indian Reservation a majority of my life. I was born in Albert Lea, Minnesota, where my family ended up because of they migrated to do farm work. And so that's where my mother and father met. They married in the, well, let's see, my mother was born in 1931, so probably like in the, I'm trying to think, I was born in 55. So, you know, the late 40s, they lived there, and they did field work for farmers. They picked honeybees and onions, and you know, just worked out in the field. Neither one of them had a high school education. I think my father went to 6th grade, my mother went to 7th grade. So me and my older siblings were born in Minnesota. We moved to the Winnebago Indian Reservation in 1964. It was a total culture shock because the community where I was born and raised until we moved to Nebraska was you know, about 20,000 people. You know, we lived in a house and had running water and electricity. And when we moved to Nebraska, to the reservation, we moved into, I think, like the first 5 houses that we lived in didn't have indoor plumbing, didn't have electricity. You know, it was small little houses. I remember I was looking at this room, and one of the houses, we called it the Sugar Shack, that we lived in, was about the size of this room. And there was a wall that divided the bedroom from the open concept living room, kitchen, dining room, and shower, bathtub room. And it was my mother, my father, and 4 of us children that lived in that little sugar shack. But you know what? It was probably one of the best times of my life. You know, life was simple. You know, I was thinking about this morning when I looked out the window and it was snowing, and I said, oh my God, I didn't even bring a winter coat. You know, what am I going to do? But by the time I got up and ready, it was sunny out and it wasn't snowing any longer. So, and all I brought was sandals. I had 1 pair of boots, so I put those on. But, you know, times have changed so much over the history. And I grew up in a time where our traditions were very, very, they were practiced on a daily basis. And one of the things the Winnebago people are known for is that we're an oral history people. We don't share, we don't write books about our history, we don't write books about our family clan systems. We share stories. And a lot of the storytelling time was during the winter months, because there wasn't any hunting or harvesting or anything to do at that time. So we did a lot of our storytelling during the winter months, and that's how stories got handed down. Well, I was fortunate enough to live with my grandmother and take care of her. She died at 101 years old. She was born in 1898 on the Winnebago Indian Reservation. And She didn't know a word of English. All she spoke was her Ho-Chunk language, and that was it. But a little bit of history. This gentleman, this feisty man here, was talking, about things. And the Winnebagos didn't originally come from Nebraska. Way back in history, over 500 years ago, we lived in Kentucky. We came from the Kentucky area of what is now Kentucky, and migrated up into the Wisconsin area. And so our people lived in the Green Bay area of Wisconsin for hundreds of years. That was our homeland. And in the mid-1800s, we made contact with the federal government, and the federal government displaced us, moved us to different places. They moved us from Wisconsin to the middle part of Minnesota. It was the Long Prairie Indian Reservation is where they moved us to. Then they moved us down to Blue Earth, Minnesota, and then they moved us to Fort Thompson, South Dakota, on the Crow Creek Indian Reservation, and we finally escaped from there down the Missouri to what now is called Winnebago, Nebraska. The land was bought from the Omaha tribe by the federal government, and they placed us there. When we left Wisconsin in the mid-1800s, and the government took us and placed us on reservations, there was about 25,000 Winnebagos that left. By the time we reached northeast Nebraska on the Winnebago Indian Reservation, there was 150 of us left. And so our chief at the time, Chief Littlepree, seeing that his people were going to be gone if he didn't do something about it. So they escaped in the middle of the night from Fort Thompson, South Dakota to where we now are located. And so my grandmother, she was there. She was born on the Winnebago Indian Reservation. We call it Big Bear Hollow Park now, but the Big Bear Hollow is where they lived. And my grandmother was born there, like I said, in 1898. She made her first contact with white people in 1908 when they opened the Catholic boarding school there. There was a lady from Philadelphia that had inherited a lot of money, and she wanted to help the Black and Indian missions in the United States. So she came to Nebraska, and the church, Catholic Church, told her to, that she could go to the Winnebago Indian Reservation and start the Catholic Church there. But one of the histories of our people was that when you got placed on an Indian reservation, the federal government decided what religion was going to go on what reservation. And so the religion that was chosen for the Winnebago people at the time was the Dutch Reformed Church. And later on in the early 1900s, there was a group of brothers, Winnebago brothers, that had heard about the Catholic Church and the similarities of their worship compared to some of the cultural things that were taught with water and incense and things like that. So they called and requested that the Catholic Church come on the Winnebago Indian Reservation. So they came to the Indian Reservation in 1908 and opened a boarding school there. So that boarding school was a boarding school up until 1986 is when they closed the doors. We still have the St. Augustine's Indian Mission School there on the reservation, but it's no longer a boarding school. But for hundreds of years, they brought Native American children there and put them in these different types of boarding schools. There were federal government boarding schools, and different religions had their boarding schools. And so my grandmother was one of them, and she used to tell me stories about how she was brought from their camp down at Big Bear Hollow. She said there was two men that came that had dirty faces, they probably had whiskers, and came and took all the young girls of certain ages away from their families, away against their will, and they even had to be tied up and put on a buckboard to take them to the boarding school because they didn't want to go and their parents didn't want them to go. My great-grandmother didn't want her to go, but she had no choice, so they took him into Winnebago, into the town of Winnebago, which is from Big Bear Hollow Park to the village of Winnebago was probably 7 to 8 miles. But my grandmother had never left her parents and never left the Big Bear Hollow, so it was totally new to her. So she was taken to St. Augustine's. So it happens that the Ho-Chunk corporate office building is built on the land that used to be owned by St. Augustine's. So you see the Ho-Chunk corporate building. To your right, you're going up a hill, and there's a big Catholic church up here, and there's the old boarding school buildings here, and the school, and places on the other side. So all around us is a Catholic boarding school. So I'm reminded every day when I go to work that that's a big part of our history, is that campus that we're on. And so my grandmother was brought there, and she was not allowed to speak her language. She said they cut her hair, they, made her wear funny looking clothes, and that was her place of living for about 5 or 6 months during that first year. She didn't know a word of English, all she talked was the Ho-Chunk language, and so it was a whole new concept for her. And a part of the things I like to do in my oral history and my storytelling is to pick on somebody. Someone pick on this gentleman right here. Because I notice he kind of
You can pick on my boss, he picks on me all the time.
Perfect time.
We goose, John, huh?
See?
We goose, John, huh?
What's my name? Steve.
We goose, John, huh?
I'm
We
good.
goose, John, huh?
I'm good. Thank you.
No.
Okay, keep trying. Keep going.
I use that as an example for, he has no idea what I said to him. So my grandmother was the same way. She had no idea what those Catholic nuns were saying to her. But they demanded her to know. And she would get punished. She would get slapped in the mouth. She would get her hair pulled. And that was their way of trying to teach her the language, the English language. What I asked you was what time it is. Okay, so you're supposed to say waruch. That means it's eat time. Let's eat. That language was enforced on us that we had to do it. And my grandmother told me a story that because she didn't know how to speak, they would pull their hair, they would slap their mouth, they twist their ears, do different things like that to them. And so this was like a whole new life for my grandmother. So the following year, she got to go back to Big Bear Hollow and get the other girls ready that were going to be brought up to the boarding school the next year. So she did that. She, tried to talk to her sisters and her relatives about, what's expected of you, and you got to do what other words are mean to you. So the next year, my Aunt Mary went with her back to the mission, and she was a year younger than my grandmother. And again, that was forced on them. And my grandmother would, whisper to her in the Ho-Chunk language what they were saying to her, and try to get her to, like ni, water, water, and show her the glass of water, which we call ni, and she would say water, 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 and use the visualizations trying to get her to understand the language. Well, they got caught, and the nuns there took my grandmother and her sister Mary down into this dark, dark room, she said, that they never knew existed in the dormitory. And it was a cold room for the heat, and she said it was around October because she remembers the leaves were falling and wet when they would play outside. And she said, so they brought me and my sister Mary in and took us down into this dark room, and it was a great big metal box down there, and she said they opened it up and it was flames and fire. And so they tied my grandmother and her sister up into a chair by their legs and their hands behind the chair, and then one of the nuns took a a little shovel and got the hot coals out of the stove, the coal burner. And the other one forced my grandmother and my Aunt Mary's mouths open, and they stuck hot coals on their tongues. And so they weren't able to eat for weeks because their tongues were all blistered. And so my grandmother said, because of that, I never taught your mother how to speak. I never, pushed the Ho-Chunk language on her because I didn't want her to suffer the pain that we had to suffer.
Wow.
And so my mother understood, because it was still people when she was growing up in the 30s and 40s that spoke the language fluently. And so she, my grandmother, didn't really force it on my mom to speak the Winnebago language. And so my mom can understand it, and she can speak it fluently if she had somebody to speak it fluently with, but she doesn't. So our language kind of got to a point of distinction in Winnebago. And so, I say, people talk, I don't know if you've heard the term historical trauma, and I've had college kids come in from like Nebraska Wesleyan and Lincoln and UNO from Omaha that come in, and I do public speaking and I talk to them. And, sometimes, some of them will say, well, historical trauma, you guys need to get over it. You just need to get over it. And I'm like, you don't realize what historical trauma has done to our people, our native people around the United States. And I said, because you know what? The only language I speak fluently is English. That right there is a sign of the historical trauma that happened to our people because our language was taken away from us. And I said, so, that's a big part of our history. So then, that's just a little history, and, to get the feel of, some of the feelings that our people still go through every day, our children, our grandchildren. It's something that's never gonna go away because our kids are the same way. Through the efforts of Ho-Chunk Inc. and the Winnebago tribe, we now have money that allows for us to have a Ho-Chunk Renaissance program, which teaches the language, which teaches different ceremonies, and teaches all these, our cultural beliefs, our values, morals, just all these things. But it's been hard going because we've had to get people from that stayed in Wisconsin, that didn't go with us through the 5 places we were placed in history. They stayed in Wisconsin. They weren't told they couldn't speak their language. Their lives weren't controlled. They just stayed in the woods in Wisconsin, kept their languages, kept our traditional ways of different ceremonies that we have. And so what we've done is we've hired people from the Ho-Chunk Nation, which is one time we were both the same tribe. The Ho-Chunk Nation and the Winnebago tribe were both one tribe. They were able to keep their language. So now what we've done is we've hired people from Wisconsin, from the Ho-Chunk Nation, to come down and teach the language. So our language is starting to pick up. It's, you have to take it at Little Priest Tribal College. You have to take Ho-Chunk language. As a junior and senior in high school, you have to take Ho-Chunk language. And so it's something that's, we're getting more and more. We have a young man, his name's Craig Cleveland Jr., and I think he's like 23 years old, and he's a fluent speaker. And so, we're getting more and more people that are speaking, being able to learn and speak the language fluently. And a part of that, I'll get to, comes from Ho-Chunk Inc. Okay, and I'll explain that later. Okay, so we moved, like I said, we moved to Nebraska in 1964. Moved into houses. I remember crying at night, especially at night when I needed to go to the bathroom in the winter or the cold, or when it was storming and we had to go out to an outhouse. And I said, I didn't realize we were poor when we lived in Minnesota. I didn't realize we were poor, and but when I when we moved to Nebraska, I felt that, you know, it was a step back in history for us. And I remember crying and always telling my mom, I want to go back to Albert Lea, I want to go back to Albert Lea. And she said, no, honey, this is where we live, this is our home, and this is where we're gonna stay. And the school there, I went to St. Augustine's Indian Mission for a few years, and the kids were mean to us up there. And, you know, later on finding out was they were jealous of us because we got to go home every night. We weren't boarders, we didn't board at the boarding school, we got to go home every night because we lived in a community, but my mother and father wanted us to continue the Catholic education that we had when we left Minnesota, so they put us in as the first day students. Little did they know they put us through a lot of trauma sending us there. So eventually my mom and dad took us out of the Catholic school, parochial school, and put us at the public school. Well, then when I got down to the public school, I was in 5th grade, and most of the kids in our public school on the Indian reservation were white farmer kids. All the Indian kids got sent off to boarding schools. This was back in, you know, in the 60s. So they got sent away to boarding schools. So it was like, okay, I thought this was an Indian reservation, and why are all these white people here? Our school board was totally white. Our village board was totally white. You know, the school was totally white, so it was like, this didn't make any sense to me at the time. So we went on, you know, that way until the early 70s. In 1972, October 1972, I was here in Washington, D.C. We took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs office on, I don't know if it's Constitution Avenue or where the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Yeah. But I remember I was just,
Interior South.
yeah, I was just like 14 years old, you know, but I had a cause, you know, to me I had a cause. I wanted life better for us, you know, I wanted to not have to be ashamed to be an Indian, okay? And so, I'm sorry, I get emotional. You know, but all the things that we weren't allowed to do. When I went to the Catholic school, we weren't allowed to try to speak our language, we weren't allowed to dance in our ceremonies, we weren't allowed to wear beadwork like I wear today. You know, we weren't allowed to do any of those things because we were gonna go to hell, you know, if we did those things. That's the way we were taught. And so, it was like, in the early 70s, my father, P.J. Snake, who happened to be the older brother of Reuben Snake, and I don't know if you guys heard about Reuben Snake, but they got involved in this group called the American Indian Movement. And, you know, we were looked at as radicals and militants and all this and that, but I remember, you know, about 300 of us caravanned out here to Washington, D.C., and we forcibly took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs office. And I was just like 14 years old. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew that we were there for a reason. You know, my mom told me she didn't want me to go. She forbid me to go, and I told her, no, Dad said we can go, and Dad's a boss, so I'm going. And so we caravanned out, and I remember the day, the deadline day they gave us. They said, you know, if you're not out by then, we're going to come in and by force take the building back. And I remember being on the top of the roof of the building, and they had all the elders and children there. In fact, there was 2 babies that were born there in the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices somewhere. But I remember that, and I remember standing up there and looking out, and the Washington Monument was over here, and on the top of the roof I could see over past the line of trees that were there, and I seen all these armed, I don't know if they were army or what they were, but there was a bunch of police, but there's a bunch of armed guys in lines, like 3 lines. And it just brought back memories to me about the history that I was taught about, you know, Custer and, you know, Wounded Knee and Sand Creek Massacre, and, you know, just all these things I had learned, and just brought those back to me. And at that time I said, okay, Mauna, Mauna is God. That's, you know, we had a name for God even before the white people came and taught us about him. He was Mauna, the creator of all living things. And I remember looking over and saying, okay, if I don't die today, I promise I'm gonna be a better person. I'll fight for my cause in a different way. So luckily they didn't come in and take it over forcibly. And so our life was, my life had changed. So I went home peaceably, told my mom, and thank you for praying for me while I was gone. You know, I've decided that I'm gonna go about things in different ways. So I start trying to change my life in the way I looked at things. And I looked at our reservation, and I looked, imagine a small rural town, and it's a farm town, and on both sides of the streets, there's just lined with businesses. When I was little, we had 4 grocery stores we could choose to go to. Whatever store's hamburger was on sale, that's the one I went to. Okay, we had 2 cafes, we had a bar, we had 4 gas stations, we had a hardware store, we had like a little Dairy Dream where you could go get ice cream cones. There was a hair salon. You know, Winnebago was just thriving with business, you know, on both sides of our main. And all our businesses were owned by white people. Not one of them was a native-owned business. And so, and then our government, our tribal council members at the time, they weren't even really our government. The Bureau of Indian Affairs told them what to do. Well, when my dad and my uncle Reuben Snake decided things had to change. This is all we have. This isn't even our homeland, but this is all we have. This 26 square foot, 26 mile square of Indian reservation that was mostly white farmers. You know, the Indians were in a little secluded area, and then the white farmers had all the farmland, was doing all the farming. And so, you know, a few of our leaders decided, no more, we have to change. So they started taking ownership back of what little land we have. And they, you know, our council started speaking up and saying, no, this is our land, this is how it's gonna be. In 1986, we retroceded from the state of Nebraska. We got our own court system, our own, you know, codes. We have all our own codes set up. And we took ownership back. And so the leadership started getting more and more vocal and more positive towards the Indian people. And eventually we ended up having like what we call a white flight. All the white people started leaving. All the business started shutting down, the buildings started getting torn down. And pretty soon Winnebago had nothing. We would have to go to Sioux City to shop. The only thing that left standing for years was the B&H bar. You know, and as Indian people, we were fighting alcoholism. You know, alcoholism very evident. As a little girl, I would walk, my mom would send me to go get bread or hamburger or something, and there were just drunks all over. Winos, they drank wine, cheap wine. And sometimes they'd be just passed out on the street, and it was just acceptable. And, you know, I would go to the store, and, you know, a wino might stop me and say, hey, little girl, you got a nickel? You know, and, you know, I just take off running. In fact, where we lived was right across a big parking lot, and the B&H bar sat right here. And then we lived in unit number 1 of housing, so we had to walk right across through the parking lot of the B&H bar whenever we went to get groceries. And I remember when me and my sisters would go, as soon as we'd hit that parking lot, we'd start saying, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and we're off to see the wizard. You know, and we'd sing this, and we'd be hugging each other and skipping along like on a Wizard of Oz. And later I thought, when we got to that piece, was because there's broken wine bottles all over in that parking lot. Just, you know, it was just green, emerald green. And so we used to use that as Emerald City. And that's whenever we'd play the Wizard of Oz, when we'd walk through that parking lot, the Bonanza bar, or the B&H bar. And it was the only thing still there. And the white man was there making money off the alcoholic Indians, and you know, and then I think it was in '92 the bar burned down. There's an electrical fire and it burned down. It's probably the best day of our people's lives. And so then that's when the council decided no more alcohol. We're a dry reservation, no more alcohol being sold on the reservation. We're gonna start putting money into alcohol programs, prevention, intervention programs. And so that was something that, you know, that we decided, you know, the leadership decided to do. But Reuben Snake, Louis LaRose, Ricky Sullivan, Neola Walker, I mean, there's people, Sam Tebow, I can think of their names, that said no more. And so we tried different business ventures. In 1982, I was hired as the Director of Human Resource. I'm a human resource person. And, and I was hired as the Director of Human Resource for the Winnebago Tribe. And I worked there in human resource for 11 years. But I remember in the year 2000, we had in 1980, we had a week-long meeting, and Reuben Snake was our tribal treasurer our tribal chairman. And Reuben said, we're gonna come up with a 20-year plan. Where do we see the Winnebago tribe in 20 years? And so for a week, we sat in a meeting, you know, putting papers up all over the walls, you know, all these different ideals people had, you know, to use our natural resources, our human resources, you know, all these things. You know, and back then, I graduated from high school in 1974, and not once did my high school counselor ever ask me if I planned on going to college, if I, you know, it was how many kids you're gonna have. You know, I tried to get a house, a single woman, I tried to get a house, 26 years old, and they wouldn't give me a house unless I had some kids. Well, you go have a couple kids and we'll give you a house to live in. You know, so it was just like, just being held back. So, you know, we tried different business ventures. We tried a tribal farm, okay, wasn't successful. You know, the white farmers that had all this big equipment and everything, they just out farmed us, and, you know, there was no way that we were farm people. We tried to build you know, I think back then it might have been a government contract even, way back then, but I know we were building missile pads for the United States government way back in the early 80s. We tried a furniture business, building big wooden furniture, and that wasn't successful. We had a home builder, a company that Lamaze Industry that would build homes for people, and there were log cabins, and that didn't work. We just were not successful. And I say my dad Reuben because in our culture, all my dad's brothers are my dad's, and my dad had 9 brothers, so I only have four of them left. But you know, Reuben's dream was to become self-sufficient. We need to be able to earn our own money. We need to be able to have our own money to decide how we're going to spend our money. Because right now we receive so many federal contracts that we have to follow what they say. We have to report every month, we have to report how we spend the money. And then they laid out to us this is how you're going to spend your money, okay? With our health department, you know, this is how you're going to run this health department, this is what you're going to do. Well, as the years went on, we realized how they had things set out for us wasn't successful. It wasn't working for our people. You know, type 2 diabetes runs rampant on every Indian reservation there is. You know, I'm an insulin dependent diabetic, and I have been for 13 years. I lost my dad 32 years ago yesterday from diabetes complications. He was blind, totally blind. He had neuropathy throughout his entire body, and he was on dialysis 4 times a week. He'd start getting his limbs cut off, you know. And so he was 55 years old when he died from diabetes. And so it was like, our people start saying, okay, this is how we need to deal with type 2 diabetes, but the federal grant said, no, that's not how you're going to do it. So we didn't even have any control of that. So my dad Reuben says, you know, we need to become self-sufficient. We need to do something. How do we do that? And so I remember that week sitting in there, we talked about morel mushrooms, they grow wild in our forest in the spring. Why can't we build some caves? Why can't we do morel mushrooms? You come out to this area and get an order of morel mushrooms that are quite spendy. Okay, where Winnebago, you buy a bread bag from somebody for $10, and so it's just, all these different things we thought of. Back then, my dad thought about ethanol. We should open up an ethanol plant. Oh, no, that's never gonna work. How's that ever gonna work? They're not gonna use ethanol, and, and now every time I fill my car, it's with an ethanol blend, so it's like, why didn't they listen? So, but we did these and it was just totally unsuccessful. And so they kept striving for better things. And then back in 2006, I was working as a tribal court administrator for our judicial system. And Lance Morgan came in representing the Winnebago tribe as he worked for Dorsey and Whitney out of the Twin Cities law firm. This young 25-year-old looked like he was 18, came into that courtroom on behalf of the Winnebago tribe, and he was representing the Winnebago tribe against a gaming management firm that was managing our bingo hall and totally ripping us off. So he came in as a young attorney, represented the Winnebago tribe. He won. He won that suit, and everybody's like, "Oh, Lance, you're awesome." I grew up with Lance. Lance's grandmother's name was Belle Snake. Belle Snake was my grandma. So, but he was younger than me. He grew up in North Omaha, and I grew up on the Winnebago Indian Reservation. But he had a tough life too, and his mom was Winnebago, his father was a white farmer for Winnebago. And, I knew of Lance because his grandpa, we call it Choka in Winnebago, lived right next door to us. He had a few hogs, and I used to just hate those hogs in the summertime. And Lance would come and visit, and he probably wouldn't like this, but he had little braids, little blonde braids. How many of you all met Lance? Yeah, okay. So, anyway, he came into the courtroom. I went in and sat in and watched him, and I thought, this kid's learned a lot, this kid from North Omaha. But one of the things he didn't understand or know of is the Winnebago culture. He wasn't grown up in that, knowing our culture. So he comes in, I think that following December, he went to the tribal council with a proposal to start a nonprofit, or to start an economic development branch for the Winnebago tribe. And so they hashed it over for a few months, and I think they finally agreed to it, to invest in Ho-Chunk Inc. And they're the Winnebago tribe is the one that named it Ho-Chunk Inc. And at the time, we had a casino. The casino was on the North Iowa side of the river, and they were giving the tribe a lot of money from their profits. And so the tribe had this money. Lance went to them right at the right time when they had the money and asked them to invest in an economic development branch of the tribe, Ho-Chunk Inc. And so the tribal council agreed, gave him a $9 million investment. And one of the things he said was that you cannot get involved in our day-to-day business, because that was our failure before. The tribal council was trying to run all these businesses that they set up. And with that, what happened was, they wanted a cut of the action. They wanted their families to have this. They wanted their families to have that. So Lance says, no, you need to separate, that power. You guys stay running the tribe, and let me run the economic development branch. So I remember this small little trailer, double wide trailer up on the hill by St. Augustine's, and I remember when they first started, it was all hotels. We had a hotel in Sloan, Iowa, where our casino's at. Had a couple of them in Omaha. Lincoln, you know, so they start building motels, and that was his initial investment was building motels. And then about a year and a half went by, and he sold them, and you know, he got more money to invest. So they just started rolling with what they could. I know there was all native systems, computers. They started selling computers and telephone systems, and things just start rolling. And they never had an HR department, okay? So I worked for the tribe in HR for 11 years, so my brother happened to be on the board of directors that started Ho Chunk Inc. And so he told Lance, he said, you know, well, I have a sister that, you know, is in HR, you know, maybe we could entice her to come work for HCI. So eventually I ended up going to work for HCI, and I remember walking in and asking, okay, well, where's your personnel files? You know, they only had like 18 employees. We don't have any files. Okay, where's your I-9 forms? Got I-9s filled out? What's an I-9 form? You know, okay, where's your payroll records? Where's your you started asking questions and they had nothing. They kept their time on napkins. I found a file, a drawer that had Jim Iwan's signed timesheet on a napkin. And I'm like, oh my gosh, lads, you guys are so out of compliance, you know. And so they had their personnel policies was a employee handbook from the hotel at Winnebagus that talked about you got paid by the rooms you cleaned, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Staff, at that time too, we were selling cigarettes. They would ship in from New York, from Seneca or Smoking Joe, and then we would sell them to other Indian tribes, put a tax stamp on it and so on, and sell them. And so that's my first, you know, memory of Ho Chunk Inc. and how it got started. And then we got into government contracting, and I remember the first time we got into government contracting, and we had to hire employees to work at Offutt Air Force Base, and we had a couple of government contracts with, I don't even remember who they were with, but they had their own HR person. His name was Arthur, and they worked out of the Bellevue office. And I remember saying, oh, I don't think I can handle this. You know what, today there's no way in hell I could handle being the director of HR for HCI. You know, there's just way too much going on. You know, we got employees all over the world. And so, you know, so I got to see Ho Chunk Inc. grow and grow and grow and grow, and you know, the money they were making, the money they're giving the tribe. I got to see my reservation from going to being just low-income housing to people being able to buy their own homes, to pick out their floor plans, their colored cabinets, their floor tiles, their carpet, you know, hardwood floors, laminate flooring. I got to see all of that, you know, and the Ho Chunk Village that's right across the street, you know, we got, you know, homes going up all over the place. We got young people being able to buy homes. In 1984, I tried to buy a home. I tried to get somebody to come in and build a home for me, my own home on my own land. And I went to 7 lending institutes, and nobody would build me a house because it was on an Indian reservation, and they didn't want to take the chance of building, and what happens if we have to foreclose, where do we go? I said, we got a tribal court system, you can file a civil procedure there, but no loaning agency would loan me money to buy a home. And I had money saved. I had about $18,000 saved at the time. You know, that many years ago, that was pretty good, and if they had credit scores back then, I probably would have had a 7.2 credit score, but they refused to come on the reservation and build me a house. So it was like all these things that just held us back constantly. So the only house I could live in was a low-income house. So how do you get in a low-income house? You stay low income, okay? I don't want to raise. I don't need to have this. I don't need to have that. When I was working as director of human resource for the tribe, you know, I was making good money, but it isn't nothing like the comparisons in Omaha and Sioux City, what they were making. You know, and I didn't know the difference. I didn't care. I was trying to help my people. And so, you know, I lived with my mother and my father for years. And so Ho Chunk Inc., through their success, through your success, you know, through the things that you guys do every day in your jobs, has made it possible on the Winnebago Indian Reservation for our people to have housing, for our people to have jobs. Education is a big thing. We have a internship program that we have that I sit on the Winnebago School Board too. I'm the treasurer of our Winnebago School District. And probably 20 years ago, every year we'd have a class, graduating class of 23 kids. Okay, 3 of them might go on to college. 1 of them might be successful, you know, and that was the history. And one day I went to a school board meeting, and I asked, well, what's our graduation class look like this year? And our superintendent said, we're probably going to graduate about 55 kids this year from high school. You know, the dropout rate is almost nothing now. You know, we've got kids going to school, but we've had to make, work together with our Winnebago tribal council, because at graduation time, we've made it where a student has to graduate from high school in order to get their money that's been building up for them. When we get a per capita payment of like $199 a month, it goes into account for them. If there's some kind of money that comes in and all the tribal members get a $200 check, well, it goes into our kids' children fund. So by the time they graduate, they have anywhere from $10,000 to $13,000 in account for them, you know, to go to college. And a lot of kids used to just blow it. A lot of it, the parents used to just take it and blow it. Well, now our kids are using those benefits to go to school, to go to college, get a higher education. Last year we had 19 college graduates. And you know what, guys, that's because you guys help us. You help us so much with the things you do, because this company, this division right here, is the biggest profit making for Ho Chunk Inc. You guys are bringing in the money by doing this government contract work, making it possible for our kids to be able to go to college, making it possible for them to have a desire to come home and have a job. Because that was something we didn't have before. We used to have a 88% unemployment rate. Today we have an unemployment rate of 14. You know, and I always tell Lance, you can't take all the credit. You know, you can't take all the credit for this. It's your day-to-day frontline workers that are doing this for you. You know, you come up with the brilliant ideas, we need to do this, you know. And I remember the day when him and Rob Libb talked about developing a nonprofit organization and being a partner in it. And so we have a nonprofit organization called Ho Chunk Community Development. And the tribe takes some of the dividend that they get from Ho Chunk Inc. and put it back into a home buyer's down payment assistance program. So all these young people, I mean, we got kids that are, you know, young people that are in their early 20s. We have a young girl, her name is Dulcie, and there was a big article about her on Indians.com. You know, she started out with me as a intern for me, her senior year in high school. Came from a family where she has 7 sisters, okay, and she's the oldest of 8, and she's got 7 little sisters. And her mother, she was the mother. Dulcie was the mother, even to her mother. Her mother would call her every day and ask her questions. Well, what should I do about this? What should I do about that? So I took this young lady under my wing, and I told her how important it was, and I told her, you know, she used to cry about her life at home, her personal life, and I said, you know what, Dulcie, you're the only one that can change that. Nobody can change that for you. You know, if you don't want alcoholism in your family, you don't want alcohol in your house, that's your decision. Nobody can say, well, yes, we can bring alcohol into your house. You're the one that owns the home, you're the one that pays the bills, you decide. You know, you want your kids to have a better education, that's up to you. Send them to the private school, pay the tuition, get them a better education. Needless to say, she's graduating in June with her bachelor's in human resource management, and you know, she just got promoted to being the let's see, she's the, I can't even remember what she got promoted to, but she got promoted in our HR department at home. In January, she just bought a new home for her and her family. Just moved into a brand new home, and she's only 30 years old. She used to be one of my cheerleaders, she used to be in my youth group, and now she has a family, and her husband are, you know, working hard. They, you know, got a beautiful home, and I just think about those things and how that wasn't possible for me, but how it's possible for so many of our kids now, our youth in Winnebago, to be homeowners. And the majority of the people that are buying homes, getting this down payment assistance from the nonprofit, they get $65,000 down payment assistance. It's so important. You guys are so important. I don't think you realize that. You don't realize how important you are to this small little Indian reservation in Nebraska. And like I said, I've come from a time when I seen we had nothing. And we were totally controlled by white people. They told us what to do. You know, now we're reaching that dream, and I tell Lance that I thank him as much as I can for bringing his knowledge to us, because he could go anywhere else and do this for any other Indian tribe. But he chose to stay with his own people and help his own people. And it's amazing to see the progress we've made, you know, and me, I'm ready to retire. I wanted to retire, and he said, no, you can't retire yet. You know, and I want to go into my own private business. I want to be an entrepreneur and open my own business and sell beadwork, so when we got people coming in, they can take a part of us home, you know. And that's why I said I got my luggage gone through the airport, because I brought a box of beads and leather, and they just had my stuff all in disarray, and you know, they're probably thinking, what's in that box she's carried? You know, so they opened it up and went through everything. But you know, I brought that with me to work on some of these, you know, because that's what I want. You know, I want to do. I just want to retire and be my own boss, and you know, there's nowhere. If you guys came to Winnebago today, there'd be nowhere you could go to buy stuff like this, because the last gift shop we had closed down. And so they're encouraging me. They're going to give me a small business loan. They're going to help me, you know, they help me write a business plan, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh, I just want to enjoy my grandchildren. But they're not going to let me rest. So, but anyway, you know, I was coming here for a whole different reason. When I went in and talked to Ann, and I told her I'm going to be gone, and told her the dates. I said I'm going to DC to for the school board, and she said, oh, okay. So then I left her office, went into my office, and 5 minutes later she come like running, Sarah, could you go to our Alexandria office and talk to the employees? And I'm like, okay. And just maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. I said, no, I gotta be back Wednesday. It's my son's birthday. I have to be back Wednesday. I said, how about if I go do it on Friday? And then she said, okay. And then so she took off, and then made arrangements for me to get here, and you know, so that's why I'm here today, because I was coming this way anyway, you know. But I was here several years ago, and I talked to the employees out at NASA, and probably the same way I'm talking to you. But you know, I just want you all to know that, you know, that's a little bit of history all bundled up in an hour about how we used to be and how far we've become. And we got so many Indian tribes that come to visit us, and Lance always welcomes them. You know, from all over the country they come and visit us, because they want to know, how did we do this? How did we become successful? I've heard Lance tell them, you know, what kind of council do you have? The council needs to stay out of it and let you run your business the way you want to. And that's our success. Our council stays out of it. There's times where they try to get involved, and we just tell them no. You know, we're not gonna be successful if you guys come in here and start trying to run the business every day. You've got 2 representatives that sit on the board of directors. Those are the people you need to be talking to, your 2 council representatives. Let us do our work. So everything we do, you know, every day, we started Ho-Chunk Farms a few years ago, so now we're back in the farming business. Now interns that we had come work for us last year that were interested, now they're switching their majors into agriculture. Yeah, so we're getting our own young people switching majors to wanna work in the agricultural field, because they see all the resources we have, all the land we have that has been farmed by white people all this time. Now we can farm it, we can be our own farmers. You know, we're building, one of the newest things we're gonna be doing is building a farmer's market on the main street of the Ho-Chunk Village, on Buffalo Trail Road it's called. We're gonna have a large facility there for a farmer's market. You know, trying to get our people to eat healthy again, since diabetes has taken so many of us, you know, so early. You know, learning things, you know, now the money that, you know, with the gas tax and tobacco tax, the tribe collects, and Lance wrote this up for the tribe, you know, well, you guys should implement a cigarette tax, a tobacco tax, and a gas tax that goes back to the tribe. And so that's where a penny goes into our Renaissance program, a penny from every gallon of gas we sell, a penny goes into down payment assistance, a penny goes into our roads department, a penny goes into our Little Priest Tribal College Fund. And so there's different, our Educare. So a penny from all that gas and cigarettes we sell goes into funding tribal programs. And we can set them up the way we want to, what we know works. We don't have to depend on, you know, government saying, no, you can't do that. That's not what the contract says. You have to do it this way. We're doing things we know are successful for our people. And, you know, so if you guys are sitting here, you know, wondering who you work for, that's who you work for. You know, and I just want to say, Pinagigi, thank you to all of you for all your hard work. Thank you very much.